Hello, Greg. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Chris. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you. And today's guest happens to be, in my opinion, one of the best sports artists I've ever seen. I'm speaking to Graig Kreindler, an award-winning artist whose art has been featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Sporting News, and Sports Illustrated, just to name a few publications. And before we start, Greg, where can people learn more about you?
Well, the best place is probably my website, which is greigkreindler.com. As long as you can spell my name, you'll probably find it. And I'm pretty much all over social, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Again, as long as you can spell my name or get something close to it, you'll probably find me.
Fantastic. And listeners, please connect with Greg, and I appreciate if you hit the subscribe and like button for our show. So, Greg, allow me to paint this picture about why I think your art is so spectacular.
Oh, man. Okay.
So in the history, yeah, absolutely. So in the history of baseball, Lou Gehrig's famous speech has to be one of the most heartfelt moments in the history of the game. If you try to learn more about it online, the images are usually in black and white, or they are in black and white, and the video is in black and white because it happened so long ago. But when I saw your painting of that moment on your website and seeing that moment captured in complete painted color, I felt like I was there.
Oh, man.
And your art must bring a lot of fond memories to baseball fans. So please just tell us how you got into sports art and specifically baseball.
Sure. I mean, first off, thank you for that. That's kind of the goal, to have the viewer feel like he or she is there, that it kind of, not to sound corny, but that the work kind of will somehow transcend, space and time. And suddenly you could feel like you're in the stands at Yankee Stadium, July 4th, 1939. So yeah, I mean, it started all kind of, I guess I blame my father for this. So I'm 40 years old, soon to be 41, unfortunately. And I always drew when I was a kid. I think the kind of stuff that I was really interested in back then was, like He-Man and G.I. Joe, like all the cartoons that I was kind of watching at the time and kids of my generation were probably watching at the time. So that was the stuff that I was kind of drawing usually. At some point when I was, I want to say maybe like 5 or 6 or 7, somewhere in that general ballpark, I found my father's baseball card collection. Now, my dad, he was born in 1944, and he, kind of grew up idolizing players on the Yankees from that generation. People like Mickey Mantle, Yogi Berra, Whitey Ford. Those were his guys. Mm. And like most kids who collected baseball cards in that era, his mother, at some point when he kind of, got a little bit older, his mother ended up throwing out most of the collection.
No.
But yeah, it's like kind of the tragic tale that pretty much everyone of his generation has, or everyone who at least collected cards. So there were some that somehow escaped his mother. I don't know how. I don't know if they were tucked away or my father just had like a special attachment to them. But yeah, he somehow kept them, and I kind of discovered them. I guess what happened, it's kind of, I always kind of say it's kind of like that it was a subconscious thing, because the baseball cards that my father was collecting from, the late 40s and early 50s, the majority of those baseball cards were illustrated. They weren't photographs. So I would look at these cards when I'm young, and I guess something clicked in my head thinking, making me think that I could do that. Not necessarily as like a job or a vocation or anything, but just that I could draw a baseball player, and, my father's baseball player is Mickey Mantle, so I can draw Mickey Mantle. It kind of opened up that avenue for me. And, I guess I kind of, although I was into baseball and, I'd go to Yankee games and everything like that all the time with my dad and my brother and sometimes my mom, as much as I enjoyed going to the games and as much as I enjoyed watching the players of that era of the 80s and early 90s, I kind of fell in love with the stories that my dad told me of players that he watched. And for whatever reason, those just seemed really vibrant to me. And this is like, this is all stuff that I'm kind of, I think is kind of filling my head on this weird kind of subconscious level because, at the time I'm young and I still love cartoons and things like that. And I'm still drawing that stuff. And, I eventually get a little older into my teenage years. You go through puberty and you chase around girls and, all sorts of weird things are happening. And art it took kind of a backseat, and sports, baseball players, drawing them, and my interest in anything, I guess, other than being a teenager kind of just wasn't there. So what I did get into, I was kind of always into like science fiction, fantasy imagery, really into like the movies that were coming out at the time and the book covers that I was seeing. And I kind of thought, somebody painted those. Maybe that's something that I can do. Thinking kind of as a 16 or 17-year-old, maybe this is something I could learn how to do, go to college for. And I did end up doing that. I ended up going to the School of Visual Arts in Manhattan, and I majored in illustration. And I had every intention of just becoming this book cover illustrator who was just kind of focusing on fantasy and science fiction. And I did it for a while in school, and all my projects were kind of had that kind of sci-fi fantasy edge, but the material, the subject matter just wasn't pulling at my heartstrings. It didn't feel like it was the right fit. So towards the end of my schooling there, kind of floundering around a bit, and I was in my portfolio class. This is my senior year. I was in my portfolio class, and the teacher asked the class as an assignment, to illustrate a relationship. And, the teacher would kind of give us these very general, generic kind of assignments, and it was up to each artist to kind of go with it wherever they wanted to. For whatever reason, the first thing that I thought of was the relationship between a pitcher and a batter. And I got kind of excited about the idea. And, I kind of ended up doing some sketches, some thumbnails, and getting a little carried away in my thinking. And okay, this is fun. I'm enjoying this. And maybe I'll do a painting of Mickey Mantle or my dad, kind of like I used to do when I was young. Only now I'm a little bit older and I have a little bit of a better idea of what I'm doing. So I would approach it from a more quote unquote mature standpoint. I did it. I got really into it. I got into the painting in this really weird way that I had never gotten into any painting before, where I got really caught up in the history kind of behind the image. So, baseball fans are incredibly particular, very anal. So if you're talking about stats, this is stuff that you kind of have to be right about. And if you're not right about them, then, you'll get called out on it. The same thing kind of goes for imagery, especially in the artistic realm. If you do a painting of Babe Ruth, it's got to look like Babe Ruth in every way. It has to look like him, not only from a portrait standpoint, but also from a body standpoint, from the kind of uniform he's wearing. And I kind of knew that. And I guess I just got really carried away with it. And I just took it to this level that was just so satisfying in a way that, not to sound corny, but in a way that art had never really been satisfying for me. It just kind of filled up this weird empty cup that I had, and it just kind of felt right. So yeah, I did this painting, and I was really proud of it. I was proud of the work that I had done. I was proud of the research that had gone into it, and how I tried to get everything right, whether it was what Mickey Mantle looked like at bat or the particular stadium that it was in, what advertisements were on the outfield walls in this particular year, what the weather was like that particular day. Was there a shadow across the field, or did the shadow only come up to just home plate? Was Mickey wearing a short-sleeved undershirt or a long-sleeved undershirt? Was it navy? Was it gray? Crazy, just crazy stuff. But I guess it not only did it feel right for me, but the teacher, he really liked it. And I think the people in the class, they liked it, I guess, as much as they would like it. And it was a successful painting, and I enjoyed doing it. And that's kind of how it started. And that's the very long diatribe. But
no, that's great. That's great. And I definitely want to piggyback on Mickey Mantle. I do have a question about him, but you're exactly right. Many of Mickey, and I'm not the expert in baseball like you are, but the early Mickey Mantle, especially his rookie card and his early cards, they're so coveted. They're considered the holy grails of baseball card collecting, and they were illustrated. But let me ask this question about your father. Did he know that he had such an influence on you being an artist? And how does he feel about your art in particular?
That's a great question. I think he knows. He definitely knows now, because I've explained that to him, and I think he kind of gets the connection. I don't know if he realized it by himself. I don't know if he realized how important it was to kind of be brought up the way I was brought up. But I know that, now I think he likes what I do, which is great, because, as a kid and a perfectionist, it's like, I want to please my dad. And obviously I want him to like pat me on the back or the head and say, good job, son. You nailed it. It looks just like Mickey Mantle. But, I think he is able to kind of get transported back, kind of like what you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast. I think he's kind of able to go back to his childhood in a way when he sees these paintings, which is awesome. But at the same time, I'm also aware of the fact that, he's my father, and I love him dearly, and he loves me dearly. And he's always going to be on my side. So it's a bit biased.
No, your art, to me, I'm not trying to exaggerate. They feel like time machines. So to give you a little insight, I live in Dallas, right? So I seen many pictures of Mickey Mantle because he lived here, but many of the pictures were of him when he was already old and broken down. But your painting of a young Mickey Mantle are just jaw-dropping. You seem to capture like the baseball player's spirit and a special joy they have in playing the game. Can you walk us through your process before you start one of these paintings?
Well, it's what happens is typically when I'm doing a painting for a client, let's say, a client will approach me and he or she will say, I want a painting of Mickey Mantle, or I want you to kind of do your rendition of this photograph, or I'll give you carte blanche. I just want something that you're passionate about, something that, maybe says baseball or something that just you really want to paint. So it's like I kind of approach each of them differently. I find that there are two things that I gravitate towards. When it comes to the subject matter, like the player that I'm depicting or the ballpark or the scene of the moment, I love doing paintings of Mickey Mantle. I love doing paintings of Ted Williams and, all of the stars. I really, really, really love doing paintings of the ball players that people, not that they don't know them or don't remember them, but the people who weren't stars, the people who were role players, the people who just kind of came up to the majors and, had a cup of coffee and that was it. Or maybe they didn't even make the majors. I'm very attracted to that. And I'm not exactly sure why, but that's part of it. And then light and color, especially light, is kind of my main kind of focus in my paintings. I think I'm always very concerned with light and color in a piece and how to kind of, it's not cheesy, but like imbue that into the painting, like to kind of take the reference material and go a little bit beyond the reference and produce something that's not like a colorization, so to speak, but something that has breathable air in it, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So I want, I pay attention to what's going on with the light, and I pay attention to how it might affect the things that are in the image and how it might affect the things that I'm painting. So like if I'm doing a painting of this ball player, I'll take, if it's a sunny image, I'll take note of where the shadows are, and I'll kind of make sure that everything is kind of where it needs to be in the painting, like the shadows go in the right direction. And, the colors of certain planes of his face will be warmer than other planes of his face. Some of them will have softer or harder edges. There might be kind of variation in the sky where, if it's a blue sky, then the blue that's closer to the direction that the sun is coming in might be a bit warmer. It's just like all these little things that I think kind of make up a whole painting. I think that's kind of how I approach it. It's just like, it's always just an opportunity to, I guess, to bring these men and women back to life, and like trying to figure out the best way to do that.
No, and it sounds like there's no stone unturned. And you alluded to this earlier. Baseball fans are fanatic about the authenticity of their baseball art. Whether it's the team logo being correct, the color of the uniforms. Where do you get these like references materials? Because I know some of these are hard to obtain, and these are sometimes pre-war baseball players that you're painting. How are you getting all those materials to paint your masterpiece?
Well, if I'm lucky enough to make a masterpiece, but if it comes down to the fact that baseball is pretty much the best visually documented sport in history. You have imagery that kind of dates back to the 19th century that goes kind of really far back towards the 1850s. We're talking like pre-Civil War stuff. And the information is out there. And, there are a lot of collectors that I've kind of come to know over the years, and a lot of institutions that I've become friendly with, or people from institutions, should I say. And there's just kind of an enormous amount of reference to draw from, pun, I guess, intended. And it doesn't always have to be a photograph. It could be information in a random newspaper.
Could it be like, not to cut you off, but could it be like the weather? Because I've been curious, because these black and white images, it's hard to tell if it's a gloomy day or a sunny day. I guess you're looking at shadows. I mean, are you getting down to that detail?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, so like there are times when if I can figure out whatever image it is that I'm painting, if I can figure out exactly what day it's taking place, what game it's taking place in, I'll go and I'll look up as many box scores of the game as I can, because you're going to get sports writers who are, very different from today's sports writers, who are describing things in a much more colorful way. And they might make like these little kind of throwaway comments that are absolute gold to me. So they might say something like, Red Rolf looked up into the robin's egg blue sky and, made the pop up, or caught the pop up, and kind of rang tears out of his eyes. So it's like, oh, okay. So it's a sunny day and it's kind of like a robin's egg blue sky. But I'll look at weather accounts from the day also, in the newspaper.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
It's a problem. Ambitious. But yeah, I try to be as historically accurate as possible. I don't know why. I mean, I don't know like what part of me is so anal that all this stuff needs to be right, but it just does. 'Cause there's always a fear that someone's going to call me out on it. I did this one painting years ago. It's like maybe 10 years ago at this point. It's a painting of Hannes Wagner. And Hannes Wagner is in action, and he's hitting the ball at Westside Park, which is the park that the Cubs played in before Wrigley was around. And I got kind of caught up in the colors that were in the stands at the time because I had no information about them. I couldn't find anything. I couldn't find anything online. I couldn't find anything in books. But what I did learn was that I knew that the image dated from 1909. And I discovered that in 1908, Westside Park, between the 1907 and 1908 season, Westside Park was renovated heavily. So I realized that the papers kind of leading up to opening day and I guess opening day itself were going to talk about that. They were going to talk about the ballpark and how it looked different. So I went through, I mean, must have been like 10 or 15 local Chicago papers, just kind of reading to see if I could get a little morsel that I could put into the painting. So I did that. I discovered that, the color of these particular grandstands were red, which is kind of like odd because it's not really a color that you associate with a ballpark, I guess, traditionally. But I put this thing in and I was taken aback by, I guess, how far I took it, because at the time, this is like 2009, 2010 or whatever, there's not a person who would still be alive who could say that I got that wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It's like if you were at that game and you were like 5 years old, there's a 99% chance that you're dead at that point. But in my head, I played this weird fantasy going on, like me being in front of a group of people talking about this painting and talking about the research or whatever. And then this old 160-year-old man coming in to the room and stopping the presentation and calling me out saying I was there that day and the ballpark did not look like this. It was not this color. You were wrong. So there's always that fear, even though it's ridiculous.
Wow. Let me ask you this question. You paint baseball players of the Negro League. What a great way to shed light on some of these forgotten players. Was this a conscious effort to paint in your part? Many of your website, you do spotlight many of them. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, it started as a big project, or actually a little project from a collector. There was a collector who approached me in, I think 2016 or something like that. He is a collector of Negro Leagues memorabilia, and he liked my work, and he wanted to commission me to do paintings of some of his favorite Negro Leaguers. So there was kind of there was talk about maybe doing 10 or 15 small paintings, which, was something to get excited about. It's a cool project. At the time, painted maybe one or two Negro Leaguers. So I was kind of jumping at the chance to do something like this. We exchanged contact information because I had met him in person at a convention. And I didn't hear from him for a while. And eventually I just kind of thought that maybe the project was dead. Because, that happens all the time. It's just people can be tire kickers, or they change their mind, or they don't have the budget, whatever. Eventually he reaches out to me and he says, listen, I still want to do this project, but I want it to be bigger because in 2020, it's going to be the 100-year anniversary of the formation of the Negro National League, which is a big deal. And what he had planned and pulled kind of strings to make happen was that he was going to have a show, specifically at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in Kansas City, of his collection to kind of coincide with that anniversary. It's 4 years away. And he thought that, these paintings would just be I guess, a great focal point and like a great way to kind of show these ball players, because not many, if any, color images of these men and women really exist. So he basically commissioned me to do like 30 to start, so the 10 and 15 became 30. And then he got a little more carried away in his thinking as time went on. 30 became 50, 50 became 75, 75 became 100, 100 became 150, and then 200, and finally it was 230 by the end. So this was kind of like a dream project, because as a baseball fan, I knew who Josh Gibson was. I knew who Satchel Paige was. I knew who Cool Papa Bell was. That's about it. That's kind of where my knowledge ends for the Negro Leagues. And I think that kind of echoes a lot of baseball fans, even baseball like historians, people who are really into it. The list of names that this guy gave me, I mean, these were people I'd say 90% of the list were people I had never heard of. So with each painting that I did, I got to know them. I got to know their story. I got to know them intimately, if you pardon the phrase. And it was so incredibly rewarding on just so many levels. And I kind of felt like not to toot my own horn or anything like that, but I thought that it was important that these men and women were not forgotten, and that, they weren't swept under the rug. I'm a middle class white guy, and I don't know anything about the African American experience now. Certainly back then, I know even less. I don't know what it was like to be black in this country, personally, socioeconomically, professionally, but I can try to portray these players as honestly as I can. And by that, I mean historically accurate. So I just wanted to kind of do what I normally do with these men and women, and let the people who view the show or whatever form their own conclusions and take from it whatever it is that they're going to take from it. I just wanted to do my best to be accurate and do them justice and present them honestly.
Yeah, that's fantastic insight. I want to ask you this question because it's interesting. While I was researching you, I wanted to see if you did commission work or if you were exclusively represented by an art gallery. And your website didn't address this, or maybe I missed it. Yet your Instagram page had one of your paintings in an auction bidding format. Can you shed light a little bit on, like, if you have fans that want to obtain one of your pieces, how is that typically done? Or how do you prefer? Is it a commission? Is it through that auction site? Where can people get your work?
Well, there are a couple of different avenues. So the auction that you saw, the painting was something that was commissioned a couple of years ago by somebody. And for whatever reason, he decided to sell. And it's very common in the baseball card and memorabilia industry to do auction formats. It's a very common thing. There are tons and tons of auction houses. Heritage Auctions down in Dallas is a big one.
Yep.
So that is not really the avenue that I sell my work in personally, unless it's kind of like for something charity related. For the most part, people who are getting my work are coming to me directly and they are commissioning me, or they are buying stuff from my inventory. I'm very, very, very blessed in that I'm very busy. I have a really long wait list, but people, for the most part, if they can afford it or swing it or whatever, then they'll commission something. And I swear I thank my stars every night, because it's like my dream to kind of be a working artist, doing something that I love with a subject matter that I love, and I'm able to do it. And I think that this might sound kind of weird, but I think that when it comes to painting, like I'm okay. I'm competent, I think, somewhat competent. But I think that the people who are buying my work, who are commissioning my work, the subject matter is already kind of baked into it, So I don't have to sell them a landscape or a nude or some allegorical piece or whatever. If it's a painting of Mickey Mantle, if they're a guy or girl from New York from the time period and saw him play, they're probably, if they like the painting, if I did a decent job, they're going to want it. If art is their thing, and if I'm lucky. But I feel like a lot of artists don't have that sort of thing where they delve into this subject matter that kind of, I don't want to say supersedes the quality of the work, but I think that it has just as much to do with the quality of the work.
Let me ask you this question, because I know you're being pretty modest, but nothing screams that you've reached a certain level of mastery until I mentioned a lot of those publications like Sports Illustrated and all those other publications that you've had your work featured. Maybe you could just share for maybe young artists that are curious, how does someone like an artist like yourself, how do you connect with them? Did they find you? Did you find them? How does that happen?
It's both. Again, I think for me, it kind of comes down to the fact that I'm doing something a little bit unique in that it's subject matter that I think a lot of artists don't really go towards. But the fact that it's something unique, I think, is what kind of draws that kind of attention to your work. If you're prolific, and you kind of build a brand towards doing that sort of thing, you can find an audience for your work, not only to buy it, but you can find an audience for people who want to write about it, who will think that your story is interesting, no matter how crazy you think they are. I think whenever that happens, if I'm lucky enough to be in any publication, I'm like, wow, I'm just like this dude who is painting baseball paintings. I'm amazed that anyone is even interested. But I think that there's also a lot to be said about the way that you carry yourself and the way that you present your work and the way that you pitch yourself. It's hard because there's no like one way to do it. There are just so many different ways. If you said you're an art director, think of how many artists, send work your way in the hopes that, you would hire them for whatever job that you might have.
Mm-hmm.
And how many different ways they try to get your attention, and how many of them are unique and good and actually kind of make you remember them. And then for every one of those, there are probably 100 who are completely forgetful because they don't think of it in that way. And they're sloppy in how they present their work, or they send you what's basically like a form email or something, and it's not personal. It's like little things like that. I just try to be conscious of all that stuff.
So Greg, we're here in a part of the show where I'd like to get our listeners to get to know you more. So these are going to be more personal questions. And like, what is the most memorable experience you've had with your art? Have you had like an old baseball player? There's got to be some magic in meeting some of their relatives or something,
Well, there are a lot of instances in which I guess I've been lucky enough to have that sort of thing where I can present a painting to a player or a player's family, and there's a great kind of sense of accomplishment you get, when you get to do that, and you kind of like get the seal of approval from them, whatever that means.
Mm-hmm.
But my favorite experience, I think so far, and maybe it's a bit of a biased take because it's one of the more recent ones. When I went down to Kansas City for the opening of the Negro Leagues exhibit, that was in February of last year. So, right before the pandemic hit. That was amazing. And it was amazing because the people at the museum always so nice to me, so wonderful and welcoming and warm and friendly. And these are people who I had been talking with for years, but never actually got the chance to meet. So meeting them and kind of, hearing them tell their stories, hearing them talk to other people about those stories, that was really special. I got to meet it was a grandson of a guy named Bullet Rogan, he's a Hall of Famer, but, kind of like one of the lesser known Negro Leaguers, but he also happens to be one of the best players of all time. I got to meet his grandson, and, he told me that he really enjoyed the portrait of his granddad, and that, I captured his likeness and his spirit, and I shook his hand, and it's like I felt like I was speaking with royalty. It was so cool. But even past that, like anything art related, one of I think probably the coolest or most significant moment of going down to Kansas City was the day that the show opened. There was kind of like a presentation at the Paseo YMCA, which is a couple blocks away from the museum. At this Paseo YMCA, that's literally where the Moguls met in 1920 to form the Negro National League. It was still there. And they basically had like this ceremony, kind of talking about the centennial and the importance of the league, and all of these dignitaries from Major League Baseball were there, and it was like press, and it was just like a big thing. But standing there, and I'm kind of like listening to all these people talk, and I'm thinking, wow, this is amazing. Just thinking that these people met in this building 100 years ago and formed this league as a response to not being able to play with the white ball players. They had to become their own kind of entrepreneurs. They had to create their own world. And pardon my French, but that's really fucked up.
Mm-hmm.
And just kind of being there and taking that in and being surrounded by that history, it was a lot. It was really, really emotional, really kind of overwhelming. And, it was, man, it was great. It was just a great weekend, but my gosh, that was special.
Yeah. What a priceless experience. Let me ask you this question. This is a fairly new question I started asking the artist on the podcast. After all these years after graduating college, has your career been what you think it would be? And has anything surprised you about it?
Since graduating from school? Absolutely. I mean, to be honest, so SVA was a great school. I learned so much there. I met so many amazing teachers, people that I became friends with and, who are still friendly with. The camaraderie of being around other people who were just busting their butts, just trying to make art and trying to learn, that same level of intensity. That was something that was really amazing. But when I left, I didn't know what the heck I was going to do with myself. I think when I first went to SVA, I knew that this kind of sounds cutthroat. I don't mean it to be, but I knew that the moment I leave school, all of the teachers that I had like suddenly become people I'm competing with for jobs. Mm. It's like you're kind of thrown to the lions. That was overwhelming. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I mean, I knew that I really liked making this baseball painting, but I didn't know if there was a career in like illustration that I could do. I didn't know if there was kind of like a career in gallery work. It's something that I don't want to say that I carved it out, but I think I just did a lot of work. I painted a lot. I made a lot of mistakes, painting wise, certainly a lot of mistakes, but career wise, made a lot of mistakes, learned a lot. And now I'm in this place where I'm able to support myself and my family with my work, which is kind of like the only thing I wanted, and still the only thing I want in terms of getting any kind of like intrinsic value from the work that I do. But there's something inside of me that is fulfilled by doing these particular paintings. And I think that I didn't realize how important it was to find that until, I guess, maybe until senior year, maybe, well, no, I shouldn't even say that, because it didn't really occur to me that this is what I was meant to do or whatever until years after. But yeah, I mean, I don't know what I imagined for myself, because I couldn't see an end game. I couldn't see, like, the only other person that I could think of who had, I guess, a career that I was kind of attracted to, who did similar work, was someone like Leroy Neiman. And I don't really love Neiman's work, but he carved out a name for himself, and he definitely has a brand. And, you look at one of his paintings and you say, that's a Leroy Neiman. It's a Leroy Neiman.
Yeah.
I kind of had to discover how important it was to kind of have my own, I guess, unique voice, whatever that was.
And
if that makes sense.
No, that makes sense. And Graig, final question: how do you personally define success?
That's a great question. How do I define success? I think when it comes to, I think it's about being fulfilled in some way. Yeah, I think that it's not about money, because I think if you're kind of trying to be an artist and the goal is to make a lot of money, then I think you're not going to be very happy. But I think that kind of going towards the light being what your passion is, whatever it is that's in you that you kind of need to get out, and kind of moving towards that, even if you're not touching it, but going in that direction creatively, I think that's success, I think.
Fantastic answer. And Graig, thank you for sharing your creative journey with us. And those were some great stories, great insight. I love your work. Listeners, please stop by, look at his work. And if you're a baseball fan, you must see. And lastly, Graig, where can people connect with you again?
So you can go to my website, which is greigkreindler.com, GraigKreindler. And you can find me on most social media platforms. I'm a bit more engaging on the social media than I am on my actual website. But yeah, if you have a computer and you can kind of spell my name right, you can find me.
Awesome. Listeners, make sure you connect with him. And until next time, take care and bye.